He only looked at me when the lawyer mentioned divorce. That was the moment I realized I had never really existed in my husband's world. The first time I met Alexander Hayes, he didn't shake my hand, he didn't smile, and he definitely didn't look at me like someone you were supposed to marry. He simply slid a silver pen across a 12-foot conference table and said, "This agreement protects both of us." His voice was calm, professional, the same tone someone might use to approve a bank transfer or finalize a real estate deal. I remember staring at the contract, 57 pages of legal language that turned marriage into bullet points. Separate bedrooms, separate finances, no expectation of emotional involvement, public appearances required, private lives optional. I signed anyway. At the time, it felt like survival. My family's business was 6 weeks from collapse, our debt climbing past $2 million, and every bank in New York had already said no. Alexander didn't offer comfort. He offered a solution. Within 72 hours of signing, my family's company was solvent again. Employees kept their jobs. My parents kept their home. And I became the legal spouse of a man who treated our wedding like a merger. The ceremony itself lasted 9 minutes inside a quiet Manhattan courthouse. No flowers, no music, no kiss, just the sound of paperwork sliding across polished wood and the soft click of a judge's pen. That night, I moved into his penthouse overlooking the Hudson River, 38 floors above the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble counters, a refrigerator stocked with food I didn't know how to pronounce. It felt less like a home and more like a museum where I wasn't allowed to touch anything. Alexander showed me where I would sleep, a guest suite down the hall from his master bedroom, then handed me a black credit card like it was part of my onboarding package. "If you need anything, contact my assistant," he said before disappearing into his office. That became our routine. Weeks turned into months. We shared the same address, but lived separate lives measured by the quiet sounds of distance. His footsteps at 6:10 every morning. The espresso machine at exactly 6:14. The elevator at 6:22. Most nights he came home after midnight, the faint scent of expensive cologne and cold winter air following him through the hallway. Sometimes I would hear him pause outside my door like he almost wanted to knock. He never did. I stopped expecting it. I learned how to exist quietly. I learned how to eat dinner alone at a 12-seat table. I learned how to answer society questions with rehearsed smiles. Yes, we're very happy. Yes, he's very busy. Yes, I understand his responsibilities. The truth was simpler. I was an obligation he had already fulfilled. Then 3 weeks ago, something started to change. It began with the dizziness. A brief wave of vertigo while pouring coffee. Then the exhaustion. The kind that made climbing a single flight of stairs feel like running a mile. I blamed stress. I blamed poor sleep. I blamed everything except the truth. Even the morning I had to sit on the cool tile floor of the bathroom because the room wouldn't stop spinning, I told myself it would pass. Alexander walked by that morning, glanced in, and asked only one question. "Are you sick?" I almost told him everything. Instead I said, "Just tired." He nodded once and left for work. That was the day I scheduled the doctor's appointment alone. I didn't know that appointment would change everything. I didn't know that by the end of that week, I wouldn't just be his contract husband anymore. I would be the man carrying 3 heartbeats he never expected. The doctor's office was on the 17th floor of a quiet medical building on the Upper East Side, the kind of place where everything smelled faintly like disinfectant and fresh coffee, where people spoke in soft voices like life itself was something fragile. I almost canceled the appointment twice while sitting in the waiting room. My name looked strange on the sign-in sheet. Ethan Hayes. I still was not used to it. Across from me, a young couple sat shoulder to shoulder, whispering and smiling at something on a phone screen. The man kept his hand protectively over the woman's fingers like it was the most natural thing in the world. I looked away. I had learned not to stare at things that reminded me of what I did not have. When the nurse finally called my name, I followed her down a long hallway painted in soft gray tones that were probably meant to feel calming. She asked routine questions. Height, weight, symptoms. I answered automatically. 5 feet 10 inches, 146 pounds. Persistent nausea, fatigue, occasional dizziness. She typed everything into a tablet without reacting. To her, I was just another patient in another quiet hour of another ordinary day. No one there knew that I was married to one of the most financially powerful men in Manhattan. No one knew that I ate dinner alone most nights while the skyline lit up outside my window. No one knew how lonely a 38th-floor view could feel. The examination room was cold enough to make me wish I had brought a jacket. I sat on the paper-covered table listening to the quiet hum of fluorescent lights, counting the seconds like they meant something. When Dr. Rebecca Moore walked in, she greeted me with a kindness I was not prepared for. She spoke slowly, carefully, the way people speak when they actually want to understand the answer. She asked when the symptoms started. I told her about the morning dizziness, the sudden exhaustion, the strange sensitivity to smells. She nodded thoughtfully and suggested a few routine tests. Blood work, vitals, nothing unusual. At least that was what I thought. About 40 minutes later, she came back holding a tablet, her expression professional but softer now, like she was choosing her words carefully. She asked if I had someone with me. I said no. She asked if I wanted to call someone. I said no again. She studied my face for a moment, then pulled a chair closer instead of standing over me. That was when something inside me began to feel different. Important conversations always seemed to begin with people sitting down. She explained the results calmly, clearly, without drama. Positive pregnancy test. Elevated hormone levels. Early stage. My ears started ringing before she even finished the first sentence. I remember gripping the edge of the table just to feel something solid. My first thought was not fear. It was confusion. My second thought was silence. I asked her if she was sure. She gave a small reassuring smile and said yes, very sure. Then she added something else. Something that made the quiet room feel even smaller. She said she wanted to schedule an ultrasound immediately because my hormone levels suggested something uncommon. I did not understand what she meant yet. I only knew that for the first time since signing that contract, my life was no longer just mine to endure quietly. Something had changed. Something irreversible had already begun. The ultrasound room was dimly lit, illuminated only by the soft blue glow of the monitor and the quiet blinking of medical equipment. It felt strangely peaceful, like the world had been paused outside those walls. Dr. Moore asked me to lie back and breathe normally, her voice steady and reassuring, the kind of voice that made you believe everything would be all right even when you did not know if it would be. I stared at the ceiling tiles while she prepared the machine, listening to the gentle hum of technology that seemed to exist somewhere between science and miracle. When she turned the screen slightly toward herself, her expression changed in a way she probably did not intend for me to notice. Her eyebrows lifted just slightly. Not alarm, not concern, something closer to surprise. She did not speak right away. Instead, she adjusted the settings, moved the scanner again, and studied the image with careful focus. Seconds stretched longer than they should have. Finally, I asked the only question I could think of. Is everything normal? She smiled softly, but there was something thoughtful behind it now. She said she wanted to show me something. She rotated the monitor toward me and pointed gently at the grainy black and white shapes that looked more like weather patterns than anything human. She explained slowly, making sure I understood each word. She said there was not just one gestational sac. She paused briefly before continuing, giving the moment room to exist. Then she said there were three developing lives, 3 separate heartbeats beginning their quiet rhythm inside me. For a moment I thought I had misunderstood her. I asked her to repeat it. She did. Triplets. The word felt too large to belong to me. I did not cry. I did not panic. I simply stared at the screen like my mind needed extra time to catch up with reality. She turned on the audio setting and suddenly the room filled with 3 soft, rapid heart rhythms, each one slightly out of sync, like a small imperfect orchestra learning how to play together. I felt my hand move to my stomach without thinking, not out of fear, out of instinct. Dr. Moore explained that multiple pregnancies required careful monitoring, more rest, more nutrition, more attention to stress levels. She asked again if I had support at home. I hesitated just long enough to answer honestly without explaining anything. I said yes. It was not exactly true, but it was not entirely false either. She handed me printed images from the scan, small glossy photographs that felt impossibly important for something that had only existed for minutes in my awareness. I held them carefully like they might disappear if I did not. On the way out, she scheduled follow-up appointments and gave me a list of recommendations. Vitamins, hydration, reduced physical strain. I nodded at everything, even though my thoughts were somewhere else entirely. When I stepped back outside onto the busy New York sidewalk, The city felt louder than usual. Taxi horns, conversations, footsteps, life continuing exactly as it always had. But nothing felt the same anymore. I stood there for a long moment holding the envelope against my chest, realizing something that Alexander Hayes did not know yet. My life was no longer defined by a contract. It was defined by 3 small futures that had already begun whether he cared or not. When I returned to the penthouse that afternoon, nothing looked different, and somehow that felt strange. The same quiet lobby, the same polite nod from the concierge, the same elevator ride that took exactly 43 seconds to reach the 38th floor. I watched the numbers light up one by one, holding the envelope carefully in both hands like it contained something fragile, something alive. Inside that envelope were 3 small photographs that had already changed the direction of my life. And yet the hallway outside our apartment was as silent and indifferent as ever. When I stepped inside, the apartment greeted me the same way it always did, with perfect stillness. No music, no voices, just the soft hum of climate control and the distant sound of traffic far below. I placed the ultrasound images on the kitchen counter for a moment and poured myself a glass of water, suddenly aware of every small decision. Drink more water. Eat regularly. Avoid stress. The doctor's words replayed in my mind like instructions for protecting something priceless. For the first time since moving in, I opened Alexander's refrigerator without feeling like I was crossing an invisible boundary. Fresh fruit, yogurt, carefully labeled meal containers prepared by a private chef. I chose strawberries because they seemed simple and safe. I washed them slowly, almost ceremonially, realizing I was no longer eating just because I was hungry. I was eating because 3 tiny lives depended on it. Later that evening, I heard the familiar sound of the front door unlocking at exactly 9:47 p.m. Alexander always entered quietly, like someone trained not to disturb anything. His coat went on the same hanger, his watch on the same marble tray, his footsteps measured and controlled. He noticed me sitting at the kitchen island and gave a brief nod, the same acknowledgement he might give a colleague in a hallway. "You are still awake," he said, not unkindly, just observant. I told him I had taken the day off because I was not feeling well. That part was true. He asked if I needed a doctor. I said I had already seen one. He accepted that answer without further questions, loosening his tie slightly as he reviewed something on his phone. For a moment, I considered telling him everything right there. The words almost reached my mouth. 3 heartbeats. Our children. Your children. But something stopped me. Not fear. Not anger. Just a quiet understanding. You cannot force someone to care. Instead, I asked if he had eaten dinner. He said he had a business dinner downtown. Conversation over. He moved toward his office, then paused briefly as if remembering something. Without looking back, he said, "If you are sick, you should rest." It was the closest thing to concern he had ever offered. After he closed his office door, I picked up the ultrasound photos again and carried them to my room. I placed them inside the drawer of my nightstand, not because I wanted to hide them, but because I wanted one thing in this apartment that belonged only to me and the 3 quiet heartbeats that had already begun to teach me what responsibility really meant. That night, as the city lights flickered through the window and the sounds of distant sirens blended into the background, I rested one hand over my stomach and made a decision without saying it out loud. I would protect them first. Everything else, including the contract, could come later. The days that followed settled into a strange new rhythm, one that only I seemed to notice. Morning nausea became my quiet. Alarm clock, arriving before sunrise whether I was ready or not. I began keeping crackers beside my bed because Dr. Moore had said small routines could make difficult days manageable. I learned which foods felt safe and which smells I needed to avoid. Coffee, which I once loved, now made my stomach turn before I even reached the kitchen. Instead, I switched to cold orange juice and whole grain toast, eating slowly while watching the early morning light stretch across the glass walls of the apartment. Alexander still left at exactly the same time every morning. 6:22. Predictable. Precise. Unchanged. Sometimes he would pause long enough to ask if I was feeling better. I always answered yes because explaining the truth felt complicated in a way I was not ready to face. I began attending follow-up appointments alone, scheduling them carefully around his calendar so there would be no questions. At 16 weeks, Dr. Moore showed me how much they had grown. 3 small shapes that no longer looked abstract. 3 distinct movements. She explained the risks again with calm professionalism. Multiple pregnancy meant higher monitoring, possible early delivery, careful attention to blood pressure and fatigue. She asked if my partner would be joining future visits. I told her he was very busy. She did not press further. On the way home that day, I stopped at a small bookstore near Lexington Avenue. I did not plan to go inside. I just found myself standing in front of the parenting section longer than I expected. Eventually, I walked in and bought 3 small books about newborn care and infant development. The cashier smiled warmly and asked if I was expecting. I hesitated only a second before answering yes. Saying it out loud felt real in a way nothing else had yet. Back at the apartment, I hid the books in the back of my closet, not out of shame, but because I was not ready to share that part of my world. My body was changing slowly now. My suits no longer fit the same way. I chose softer clothes, looser fabrics. One evening, Alexander noticed the change, but said nothing directly. Instead, he asked if I needed the tailor scheduled. Practical. Efficient. He always solved problems he could measure. What he did not see were the small moments he was not there for. The first time, I felt a flutter that was not just discomfort, but movement. The quiet afternoons when I would sit near the window reading aloud from one of the books just to hear my own voice filling the silence. The night I placed my hand against my stomach and whispered promises I had never imagined making. I promised safety. I promised patience. I promised that no matter what happened with the contract, they would never feel unwanted. One Friday evening, Alexander canceled a dinner meeting unexpectedly and came home early. I found him standing in the nursery-sized spare room we had never used, studying the empty space like he was evaluating square footage. He asked if I thought we should convert it into a guest office. I looked at the empty walls and imagined 3 small cribs instead. I told him we could decide later. He agreed without hesitation. Later that night, after he returned to his office, I stood in that doorway again and understood something clearly. Secrets do not last forever. Eventually, truth finds its way into every room. The truth did not arrive as a dramatic moment or a sudden confession. It arrived quietly on a Tuesday morning through something as ordinary as paperwork. Alexander had a habit of reviewing every financial document connected to the household, not because he was suspicious, but because control was the language he understood best. Medical insurance statements, billing summaries, coverage reports. Numbers told him stories people did not. I did not know any of this until the evening his assistant accidentally forwarded a routine medical authorization form that required a spousal acknowledgement due to extended prenatal monitoring. I was in the living room when he came home earlier than usual, his expression unreadable in the way it always was when he was processing something important. He did not remove his coat right away. He did not check his phone. He simply stood there holding a single sheet of paper like it weighed more than it should. "Ethan," he said, and something about the way he said my name made the air feel different. He almost never used it. I looked up slowly. He asked a simple question. "Why does this document list you under high-risk prenatal care?" For a moment, I considered pretending I did not understand. But I had already decided weeks ago that when the truth came, I would not run from it. I asked if we could sit down. That seemed to surprise him more than anything. We sat across from each other at the long dining table that had always felt too large for 2 people. I placed the ultrasound envelope between us like evidence of a life I could no longer keep separate. My hands were steady when I opened it. I slid the 3 printed images toward him without speaking. At first, he did not react. He studied the photographs like they were complex blueprints. Then his eyes moved again and again. His breathing changed slightly, not faster, just deeper. "There are 3, he said quietly. Not a question, a realization. I nodded. Silence filled the space between us, but it was not the empty silence we were used to. This one had weight. After what felt like several minutes, he asked the question I had expected and feared at the same time. "How long have you known?" I answered honestly. "Almost 2 months. His jaw tightened slightly. Not anger. Something closer to regret. "Why did you not tell me?" That question deserved the same honesty. I told him the truth without trying to protect either of us. "Because you never asked if I was happy. I did not think you would ask about anything more." That was the first time I ever saw Alexander Hayes without an immediate response. The man who negotiated billion-dollar agreements without hesitation had no prepared answer. His eyes moved from the images to me like he was seeing something for the first time. Finally, he spoke, his voice lower than usual. "Are they healthy?" That was the first question he asked about them. Not about liability. Not about timing. About them. I told him what the doctor had said. That they were strong. That they needed careful monitoring. That everything from this point forward would matter. He leaned back slightly, absorbing every word. Then he did something small but unforgettable. He reached forward and touched the edge of one ultrasound photo with careful fingers, like he was afraid of damaging something fragile. In that moment, I understood something important. This was not the end of distance between us, but it was the first crack in the wall that had always existed. The next morning, Alexander did something he had never done before. He did not leave at 6:22. I noticed immediately because routine had always been his language, and any change in routine felt louder than words. I found him in the kitchen reading something on his tablet, while a cup of coffee sat untouched beside him. When he saw me, he did not look away like usual. He studied me carefully, not in a cold analytical way, but like someone trying to understand a situation he had previously ignored. "I have cleared my morning schedule," he said. The statement sounded almost unfamiliar coming from him. I asked why. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "Your next appointment is today? I will go with you." For a moment I did not respond because I was not sure I had heard him correctly. This was a man who scheduled his personal life in 15-minute increments, who measured time like currency. Yet there he was, canceling meetings without negotiation. I told him he did not have to do that. He answered simply, "I know." That was the first time I realized he was not doing it out of obligation. The car ride to the medical building was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. Not distant, just careful. His driver kept his eyes forward while the city moved around us in its usual restless motion. At one point, Alexander asked if I had been feeling enough movement. I was surprised he knew to ask that. I told him yes, small movements mostly in the evening. He nodded like he was memorizing information. At the clinic, he stayed beside me instead of standing apart. When Dr. Moore entered and greeted us, she seemed relieved to see I was not alone. She explained the progress carefully, showing us updated scans. 3 growing forms. 3 steady heart rhythms. Alexander did not interrupt once. He asked thoughtful questions instead. Nutritional requirements. Recommended rest periods. Delivery planning. His questions were precise, but his voice carried something new. Concern that was not about control. After the appointment, he surprised me again. Instead of returning directly to the office, he asked the driver to stop at a small boutique store I had never noticed before. Inside, everything was soft colors and quiet music. He did not say much. He simply walked slowly through the aisles, studying items with the same focus he used in boardrooms. Eventually, he picked up 3 small knitted hats, each a different shade of blue and gray. He held them in his hands for a long moment before placing them carefully on the counter. When I asked why he chose those, he answered honestly. "Because there are 3. No grand speech. No dramatic apology. Just recognition." That night, he did something even more unexpected. He knocked on my door. Not loudly. Just once. When I opened it, he looked slightly uncertain, like someone stepping into unfamiliar territory. He asked if it would be all right if he checked on how I was feeling before going to sleep. I said yes. He did not come inside. He just stood there for a moment and said, "I did not realize how much I was not seeing." Then he added quietly, "I am trying to learn." That was the first time I believed change might actually be possible, not because he promised it, but because he admitted he had something to learn. Change did not happen all at once. It arrived in small, almost invisible adjustments that would have meant nothing to anyone else, but meant everything to me. Alexander began coming home earlier, not every night, but often enough that the apartment no longer felt like a place where I simply waited. Sometimes he would sit across from me while I ate dinner, even if he had already eaten. He said it was inefficient for me to eat alone at such a large table. I knew efficiency had nothing to do with it. One evening, he brought home a folder instead of his usual stack of contracts. Inside were articles he had printed about multiple pregnancies, neonatal care, and emotional development during early childhood. I watched him underline sentences with the same concentration he once reserved for corporate negotiations. He asked questions that were careful and specific. How many hours of rest did Dr. Moore recommend? Was I drinking enough water each day? Had I experienced any sharp discomfort or unusual fatigue? No one had ever asked me those kinds of questions before, not because they were dramatic, but because they required paying attention. As the weeks passed, the small spare room we once discussed quietly began to change. At first, it was just measurements. He stood in the doorway with a tape measure, noting dimensions in a small notebook. Then came deliveries. 3 cribs assembled with precise symmetry. A soft rug placed carefully across the hardwood floor. Neutral colors. Calm lighting. He did not ask if I approved. Instead, he would say, "If you would like something different, we can change it." It was his way of offering choice instead of control. One afternoon, I found him sitting alone in that room, holding one of the small knitted hats he had bought weeks earlier. He did not notice me at first. He was turning the fabric slowly between his fingers like he was trying to understand how something so small could matter so much. When he realized I was there, he did not try to explain himself. He simply said, "I did not understand what responsibility meant outside of contracts." That sentence stayed with me, not because it was poetic, but because it was honest. As my pregnancy progressed, the physical reality became harder to ignore. My center of balance changed. Walking required more care. Even standing too quickly could leave me breathless. Alexander noticed everything. Without making it obvious, he adjusted small details. A chair placed closer to the entryway. A glass of water already waiting beside my usual seat. A quiet reminder on my phone to take vitamins that I later discovered he had scheduled through the shared calendar. He never announced these things. He just did them. The night everything felt most real was a quiet Sunday when a storm moved across the city, rain tapping steadily against the tall windows. I was resting on the sofa when I felt 3 distinct movements at once, stronger than before. Without thinking, I reached for his hand and placed it gently against my stomach. At first he froze, uncertain. Then his expression changed in a way I had never seen. Not shock, not fear, wonder. The movements happened again, small but undeniable. He did not speak for several seconds. When he finally did, his voice was barely above a whisper. "They are real." I nodded. He kept his hand there a moment longer than necessary, not out of hesitation, but because he did not want to lose the moment. For the first time since our marriage began, neither of us was thinking about the contract. We were thinking about what came after it. The final weeks arrived with a quiet sense of gravity, like the air before a long-awaited sunrise. Dr. Moore explained that with 3 babies, delivery would likely come earlier than a typical pregnancy, somewhere close to 34 weeks, if everything remained stable. Alexander attended every appointment now without needing reminders. His calendar, once filled only with board meetings and acquisition calls, now included notes like prenatal checkup and nutrition consultation. He never spoke about what he canceled to make that time, but I knew enough about his world to understand what it meant. The night before the scheduled hospital admission, he did something unexpected. He brought home a simple wooden picture frame and placed it on the kitchen counter. Inside was one of the ultrasound images, the clearest one where all 3 forms could be seen together. "I thought this should not stay hidden in a drawer," he said. It was the closest thing he had ever given me that felt personal instead of practical. The hospital stay itself was calm and carefully managed. Soft lighting, monitors quietly tracking heart rhythms, nurses who spoke with reassuring confidence. Alexander stayed in the room more than anyone expected. He answered work calls in low voices near the window, always ending them quickly. At one point, his chief financial officer tried to insist he attend an urgent meeting in person. Alexander answered with a calm certainty I had never heard before. "I am exactly where I need to be." When the day finally came, everything moved with focused precision. No chaos, no raised voices, just a team doing what they were trained to do. Hours later, 3 newborn cries filled the room one after another, each one small, but powerful enough to rewrite everything we thought we understood about our lives. When the nurse placed the first baby into my arms, time seemed to slow in a way I had never experienced. Tiny fingers, closed eyes, a future that had once been only a blurry image on a screen. Alexander stood beside me, completely still, like he was afraid that even breathing too loudly might disturb the moment. When the second and third babies arrived safely, I saw something change in his expression that no contract could have created. Not relief, not pride, something deeper, recognition. Later, when the room finally grew quiet and the babies slept in their small bassinets, he pulled a chair beside my bed and spoke without rehearsing the words. "I built my life on agreements that protected assets," he said quietly. "I did not understand that people are not assets." He looked at the 3 sleeping faces before continuing. "I cannot change how I began this marriage, but I can choose how I continue it." He did not say the words I expected. He did not say love. Instead, he said something that mattered more. I will spend the rest of my life becoming someone worthy of this family. Months later, on a clear autumn afternoon, we took a photograph in the living room of the apartment that no longer felt empty. 3 infants in soft blankets. Alexander standing closer to me than he ever had before. No contract on the table between us. Just 4 hands holding 3 small futures. Looking at that moment, I finally understood something simple and true. Our marriage had started as an agreement. Our family began the day he chose to stay.